Danny. So I get quite a few questions regarding resting periods and dormant orchids from you guys, and what types of orchids need a rest period. And I thought we should discuss this more because I think there is a slight confusion regarding this subject, and I actually don't think any orchid ever goes dormant, or at least no orchid that we can find available in stores. And I'll tell you what I mean. I'll give you an example. Think about amaryllis bulbs or amaryllis plants. They actually do go dormant during winter time. You have to keep the bulb dry and cool during winter, and it will sprout back to life in the springtime. Also, the trees, the deciduous trees, they lose the leaves and everything and go dormant during winter time, and then they sprout back to life during spring. Now, I don't think orchids actually do that, but the closest thing to that would be deciduous dendrobiums and nobile dendrobiums. But again, I don't really think it's the same process. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what I understand by rest and how it applies to orchids. Now, the Dendrobium nobile orchid, in its natural habitat, encounters a drier and cooler period of time during winter. And this actually induces blooming in this orchid, but it doesn't really need it. It doesn't affect it if you don't give it this dry and cool period. It will only mean you won't have as many flowers. It would just produce many more keikis because the conditions are favorable for growth, and that's what this plant will do. It will start growing babies and multiply, and it'll skip the whole blooming process, and we don't want that. So this is why we give a rest. Let's call it a rest, although I think it's just a treatment. This is why we give it a rest to this type of orchid. We water it less, we give it slightly cooler temperatures just to mimic the natural conditions. It doesn't mean the orchid actually really needs it to survive. It can survive without it really well, but the rest period refers to the fact that the plant is not actively growing leaves anymore, but it is actively growing buds and also roots. So this plant doesn't really go dormant. As I was saying, the closest orchid that goes through a sort of a dormancy process would be the deciduous dendrobium, which after it's done growing, it starts to lose the leaves. But this process actually happens even if you don't give it a drop in temperature. It would help if you do that because in its natural habitat it does go through something like that, but it doesn't really mean the orchid stops activity altogether. It will pull energy from the leaves into the cane, and it will start preparing the buds pretty soon after this process. Also, the roots are still actively growing, or some of them are still actively growing. So the plant doesn't really go dormant, but it just really looks that way because it's losing its leaves. Other than that, the canes stay green and they're actually preparing for producing buds and flowers, and after that it will start growing again. So yeah, this is what I mean by a rest. Just maybe stop watering so often and give it lower temperatures, but do not cut off light because the plant is actually not dormant like a amaryllis bulb that can be kept even in the fridge. So yeah. Recently, one of my viewers asked me about oncidiums and intergenerics and when they should give their rest. And I think this type of orchids, or the wide majority of this type of orchids, really doesn't need any rest at all. And I'll tell you why. Because right after blooming, the plant will start to regenerate roots. It will start growing new roots and also new pseudobulbs. So actually the plant is not resting at all. But I think I know why the slight confusion. Because in the active growth mode, this plant requires tons and tons of water. It will be on a fast forward pace if you want, and it will require watering more often. And after the blooms are done, the growth slightly decreases until the new shoots get big enough. So maybe this is why many people say that it's resting or anything, but the truth is the plant is really not resting. It's starting to produce the new sets of bulbs, the new roots, and so on. And yeah, I think this type of orchids really doesn't need any rest at all, as we understand it, not even when it's blooming, not even when it seems that it's not doing anything at all, because if you look closely, it actually is doing a lot of stuff at the same time. Now with Phalaenopsis orchids, I think you can talk about a sort of a rest, but it's really not what you think. I actually do believe Phalaenopsis orchids never go to sleep, ever. If they're not producing leaves, they will start to produce roots and flower spikes. If it's not the season for flower spikes, it will produce leaves and roots, and I actually think the roots of a Phalaenopsis are constantly growing. If they're getting what they need, they're constantly growing without ever stopping. Now, the resting period can apply to the flower spikes actually. As you can see, this Phalaenopsis has 2 flower spikes, and it had enough energy to put into both of them because I did not overdo it with trying to induce side spikes or secondary spikes. When this orchid was done blooming, I did not cut the flower spike above a node or anything. I just cut it straight down to the base here because I didn't want this orchid to put her energy into new lateral, side spikes, because they really are not as great. So if you can associate rest with the Phalaenopsis, I think it refers to leaving the plant focus more on root and foliage production rather than spend its energy on flower spikes. So in a way, you're letting her rest from producing flower spikes, but it really does never go dormant. So, okay, this is my opinion on dormancy and dormant orchids and resting orchids and so on. It really doesn't mean what you think it means when you're thinking of other plants that sprout annually or they need to actually die in wintertime. They don't die, but anyway. So yeah, hope you found this useful, and hope that now you know how to care for your orchid and when to give it a sort of a rest and what sort of a rest it needs. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, you can just simply subscribe to my channel, and if you want to leave me any questions or suggestions or anything, you can just use the comment section below and I'll get back to you. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.